Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of USA Global TV and Radio. The content presented is for informational purposes only and is intended to foster open discussion and debate. Viewer discretion is advised. USA Global TV and Radio does not endorse any particular viewpoint and encourages viewers to seek out additional information and perspectives.
Welcome home to USA Global TV and Radio, a place where dreams take flight, with authentic storytelling, diverse perspectives and meaningful conversations, where global stories unite and bridges are built beyond all borders. Discover world-class education, entertainment, hope and inspiration. Together, we're building bridges worldwide. Subscribe to our channel, USA Global TV. Download our app, USA Global TV. Be our guest or join our team. Visit usaglobaltv.com. Thanks to our founder and executive producer, Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Music score by Yeffy Tang from Cloud Road Music. Voiceover artist Mike Porter. Creative direction by Paul Garcia. USA Global TV and Radio, your home for global connection. All rights reserved. This video and its contents are the exclusive property of USA Global TV and Radio. Unauthorized use, duplication or redistribution in any form is strictly prohibited.
Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. I keep notes continuously with stories from the week. For this week, I have over 125 pages of notes, so I'm not going to be running out of material anytime this decade, folks. SAVE Act, just common sense. As a lifelong conservative, I do love it when the whack liberals put their foot in it. Basically, the opposition to the Save America Act, which simply requires voter ID, is racist and sexist. The liberals claim that it would be disenfranchise minorities and females. What century are they living in? One liberal congressman claimed that women do not have ID. Moron! My calendar says it's 2026, not 1890. And don't get me started on race. Now, one liberal that I know, after realizing that race is a no-go, is now claiming that it would hurt the poor whites in Appalachia. Yep, they can't get to civilization to get an ID. Hey, you know what? I was in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee last summer in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. The place looks like Las Vegas. I'm pretty sure those folks know how to get ID. Crazed Chucky Schumer is using the term Jim Crow 2.0 to block SAVE. I find this hilarious in that Southern Democrats, not Republicans, were behind the Jim Crow laws. Time for Chucky to check in at the facility for the mentally impaired. Dem Senator from Pennsylvania, John Fetterman, has now come out in favor of the SAVE Act. Maybe some other Dems will catch on that this is a 90-10 issue. That's right, 90% of Americans favor voter ID. And maybe the other Democrats will get the message. Dems threaten to shut down the Department of Homeland Security. In their most anti-American move yet, the Dems are threatening to shut down the Department of Homeland Security because they're mad at ICE for removing some of their voting bloc. For what other reason could the Dems be on the side of murderers, rapists, and other criminals? The humor of the situation is Trump already agreed to add body cameras, and Tom Homan already announced he was pulling 700 ICE agents out of Minneapolis. Further, ICE has a couple years of dedicated funding. The DHS, on the other hand, includes FEMA and TSA. This is basic security for Americans. The current Dem leader in Congress has put together a wish list that would incredibly interfere with the important law enforcement work of ICE. This disgrace to America forgets the active ICE operations under his beloved Obama. That's right. At this point, Obama was ahead on deportations of Trump. As I said in last week's Saving America, week in review, I support reasonable reforms for ICE. I suspect a majority of conservatives do. As usual, the Dems want to stop ICE altogether since they cannot win elections without illegals being counted in official census numbers and without their votes. Look, this is the only reason they're taking the positions that they're taking. DOT pulls hundreds of illiterate truck drivers off the road. My number one concern is safety. A mystery for me is why any business would want someone operating a truck who's not fully qualified to do so. The legal liabilities are massive. Frankly, I think one way to clean this up are plaintiff suits against the companies that hired these unqualified drivers. The numbers are stunning. The DOT tells us that the U.S. Department of Transportation ran a 3-day national operation called Safe Drive. They did 8,200 inspections in a 3-day period across 26 states. An amazing 704 drivers were taken off the road. The most common reason was that 2/3 of them did not speak enough English to understand road signs and other directions. 56 were arrested, including DUI and being in the U.S. illegally. Over 1,200 vehicles had their status pulled for safety issues. Again, the legal liabilities here are major. I call on insurance companies to audit their insured companies to make sure that their customers are only hiring qualified drivers. Trump RX arrives. Love the concept, hate the name. As I've said before, systems and laws are for people. I do not want any politician to name any bill or proposition that has the name of the current politician. Glad Trump did something that is decades in the making. Why on earth, when so many medical and pharmaceutical discoveries are developed here in America, many with our tax dollars, would we pay the highest prescription prices in the world, sometimes 200, 300, 400 times more than other countries? Best guess, politicians from both parties are heavily supported by the pharmaceutical lobbies. As I understand it, many major drugs are still under patent. That is when they are the most expensive and will be available through this new government pharmacy operation. The prices Trump mentioned in his announcement were very attractive. Given that this could be an inconvenient way to get drugs, I suspect this will force drugs at normal pharmacy operations to present the same prices. The term that Trump applied is that the U.S. will receive most favored nation treatment. Americans will be guaranteed the best prices available in the world. This should have been accomplished on a bipartisan basis decades ago. I salute Trump for getting it done. The leading stock index, the Dow Jones, hit 50,000 for the first time. Of course, the headline does not tell you that a bunch of stocks took a major hit for 3 days prior. So part of this was simply a recovery. A couple lessons: don't ride the market daily unless you're in the business. I suggest checking your account once a month, or even better, quarterly. That will help preserve your sanity. Some say stocks are for the rich folks. Not me. Most Americans have saving accounts through their employer. There are 401k for private sector employers and 403b for nonprofit employers. So the stock index moving to that level is, generally speaking, good for employee savings accounts and retirement accounts invested in the broad market. Balancing what appears to be good news, the January jobs report indicated only 22,000 new private sector jobs were added. This is a pitiful number. A good number would be about 170,000 or more. In fact, it was even lower than the expected 45,000 new jobs. This is the challenge for Republicans. Those without jobs or fearing losing their jobs may not vote or will vote for the Dems. That is despite the fact that the Dems feature high taxes and other disastrous policies. See what the new Dem governor of Virginia has done in just a month. Washington Post announces massive layoffs. Given how bad the Post newspaper is, I'm surprised it took them this long to start real cuts. An estimated 1/3 of their staff is being laid off in what is called a strategic reset. Now, there's nothing funny about being laid off. I was laid off from a faculty position during the Great Recession. It took me a full year to land another faculty position. In this case, I found it humorous that because the owner of the Post is one of the richest persons in the world, some have suggested he should have used his wealth to keep more folks employed. They must have missed the part about the Post being a business. The Post's declining popularity could also be tied to what some of us conservatives call wokeness on steroids. In one report I saw, the Post had 12.5 reporters tied to climate change. 2/3 of them may be laid off. And folks wonder why the paper has been sinking for 3 decades in terms of reporting quality. Some people leaving actually blamed the owner for trying to curry favor with Trump. Come on, guys, nobody reads that rag since it had zero credibility due to sloppy, biased reporting. Trying to be objective would have helped, but that is not how the latest version delivered the news. I heard that the birds refused to have the Post line the bottoms of their cages. Another disturbing report of federal waste. U.S. Senator Joni Ernst, a Republican from Iowa, announced that dumping vacant or underused Fed properties could save $3 billion in deferred maintenance and $100 million a year in operating costs. Ernst has introduced legislation to expedite the dumping of these properties. Her bill is the Disposing of Inactive Structures and Properties by Offering for Sale and Lease Act. That's right, the acronym is the Disposal Act. She is heading up the DOGE effort in the Senate. We've not heard much about DOGE since Musk left last May, but this must continue to be a priority in our government. As I say, cut, cut, cut. In a sign of the times, one of the earliest stalwarts in the American pizza business said it will close 250 out of its 6,000 locations. Pizza Hut is owned by Yum Brands, which also owns Taco Bell and KFC. The pizza operation was a laggard, but the company reported good performance for its other two brands. Yum Brands even indicated it was considering the sale of the venerable pizza operation. In contrast, its KFC brand opened its 30,000th location worldwide. As someone who does not eat at any of the three chains, all I can say is I'm fascinated at what does well and does not do well in this market. My favorite pizza comes frozen at the supermarket, where there are numerous quality options these days.
All rise.
Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. Once you hear from our next guest, I'm sure that you will agree that he deserves the moniker of interesting person. Dr. Kevin Jatna, who is the chief statistician, data scientist, and senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Center for Data Analysis. Now, folks, don't turn us off. We're going to be talking about real life, not boring stats. As an applied statistician, he has researched and published on the use of high-powered statistical models in public policy, medical outcomes, business economics, and professional sports, among many other fields. Dr. Jatna has also worked on numerous policy areas, including energy, climate, tax, healthcare, social security, welfare, and labor policy. He is a prolific scholar, having published numerous papers both at the Heritage Foundation as well as in peer-reviewed literature in statistics, economics, law, and public policy. His work has been referenced by many high-profile politicians and media outlets. He did his undergraduate work at the University of California, Berkeley, majoring in applied mathematics with a specialty in mathematical physics. He holds 2 master's degrees from the University of Maryland, one in business and mathematical statistics, and topped that with his PhD in mathematical statistics from the University of Maryland. We had to shorten his bio to allow time for him to have the interview. We welcome Kevin Jatna for his first appearance on Saving America.
Good to be with you, David. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad we were able to arrange it. First question I want to ask you is the big picture. You know, the concept of global warming has morphed from climate change, but it's all still relatively new. How did all this stuff get started, and why is it an issue for rational people?
I mean, there have been concerns about global warming and climate change for decades, going back, to the 70s and 80s. But in relatively recent times, I would say now maybe, a couple decades ago, the concept became termed as climate change from global warming to encompass broader considerations rather than just temperatures warming. For example, which we look at in our research, which I think we're going to get to in this interview. For example, changes in rainfall, changes in hurricane trends, changes in trends in tornadoes, manifestations of global warming and climate change in terms of plant life and agriculture, as well as animal life, as well as, for example, from a public health perspective amongst us human beings.
Well, it's a fascinating area, and of course, a lot of skeptics have said, well, the climate warming wasn't quite getting their point across, so that's why they suddenly decided to call it global, from global warming to change it to climate change.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. Much of the media and big organizations like the EU and the UN seem to have really bought into this hysteria of climate change. What are some examples of the claimed statistics and the real statistical facts?
Well, I mean, and that's the interesting thing, actually, David. There are a lot of claims that have been going around for quite some time. For example, in fact, I think you can even go back to the early 2000s. It's hard to believe that was over 20 years ago.
Yes.
But in 2004, former President Bush was briefed that by 2020 or so, Europe would be suffering from major consequences of climate change, including a widespread famine and all these other issues. And now it's 2025. Has that happened? Absolutely not. And we looked at that in our research. The concerns about climate change, so this is the point we really make. The climate is changing. It always has been. And there has been a response to CO2 emissions. But the question is, to what extent? The question is, will the proposed policies do anything about it? And more fundamentally, is this really that much of a problem? Or is it something that we can adapt to? And the answer is, it's not really a problem. It's something we can adapt to, and it's vastly overstated, and it's overstated for political purposes so lawmakers can seek leverage over the economy.
Well, in regard to things like one of the things I've had the good fortune to be in Hawaii, and I flew over their volcano out there. And my understanding is with we've got an active volcano this week out in Iceland, and one of these things goes off, it produces far more what people are considering contaminants into the air than many factories. Isn't that true?
Well, I mean, so that's a very, very interesting question, David. What we can say is that volcanic eruptions over the past, speaking of global warming,
Yes.
major volcanic eruptions in the prior several decades have actually contributed to global cooling because of the chemicals that are emitted into the stratosphere that ultimately contribute to global cooling. So there is much more than meets the eye. It is much more nuanced than people consider. And the bottom line is that the predictions, the doom and gloom that we hear from the left, that we hear from lawmakers, is vastly overstated. The adjective I like to use, coined by my late friend Pat Michaels, is lukewarming. The planet is warming, but not nearly to the catastrophic extent that people claim it is.
It's a fascinating subject, isn't it? So how does the new book, Cooling the Climate Hysteria, Separating Fact from Fiction, help to advance a more rational approach to normal changes in weather patterns? There's the book.
Absolutely. It's right here. So yes, absolutely. So we commissioned a variety of experts from all across the world to write papers on different aspects of climate change. And we compiled all these papers into an anthology in this book. And it's a great read. It's available on heritage.org. So speaking of the doom and gloom predictions, we had Dr. Roy Spencer juxtapose the actual climate models that researchers depend on to make these predictions versus actual temperature data. And really a great way to test the accuracy of a model is to see how does it do on prior data? How does it predict the past? And what we see time and time again is the vast majority of these models grossly overpredict temperatures. And if they were correct, yes, it is hot, it's the summer, but it would be much hotter today than otherwise. We look at other great questions like trends in hurricanes and tornadoes. Whenever a major hurricane hits, you hear hysteria about, ooh, this is due to climate change. And the bottom line is hurricanes have wreaked havoc. They've wreaked havoc since the Pilgrims had settled here in the United States in the 1600s. And they will continue to wreak havoc, sadly. And they cause damages. They've always caused damages, and they cause more damages now, but there's a very simple reason why. We're richer as a society. I mean, there's more to damage, obviously. And the bottom line, though, is that since we're richer, since we're wealthier, since we are more knowledgeable and better developed society, and with better technologies, we're better able to deal with these issues that come our way, whether they're weather related or not. And that's really the bottom line. Any policies that are proposed by lawmakers need to be predicated on enabling us to deal with these issues that come our way.
Well, you raise a very interesting point here at the end. And as you know, I'm here in Houston, Texas, about 250 miles away. We had a horrible human event on July 4th. The Guadalupe River, there was a rain cloud. It was not a tropical depression. It wasn't a hurricane. It was just a rain cloud. of unusual dimensions, and it dropped 7 inches of rain in a 45-minute period, and it caused the Guadalupe River to send a wall of water 26 feet high down the river. I was on a different webcast earlier this week called Unscripted Politics, where I have a running debate with some liberals, and they were like, well, see that? That's the climate change and global warming. And it was like, well, in 1987, the Guadalupe River did the same thing and wiped out a school bus and killed 10 people.
Oh
It doesn't
God.
sound to me like it was that much different than what happened 30 something years ago.
And here's the more fundamental issue, David, and this is something that I don't even think they understand. Suppose their doom and gloom predictions are true. Suppose, for example, we could eliminate all CO2 emissions from energy right now, today, for the end of till the end of the century. Suppose there are no CO2 emissions whatsoever from fossil fuels. You will see, you can even Google this and find our model online, the Heritage Foundation Climate Calculator, based on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's model for the assessment of greenhouse gas-induced climate change. If the United States were to completely cease CO2 emissions starting right now, you would have less than 0.23 degrees Celsius temperature mitigation by the end of the century, even assuming the worst case scenarios about the sensitivity of the planet to CO2 emissions. So even if the alarmist predictions are true, which they're not, these policies aren't going to push the needle on climate change. Even if the European Union were to completely eliminate CO2 emissions, there'd be less than 0.13 degrees Celsius temperature mitigation by the end of the century. So their proposed policies won't do anything anyway. Well,
Yeah,
but I can tell you one thing that they will do. They will impoverish us for generations to come because they will shift us away from the most affordable and reliable sources of energy.
Absolutely. We also only represent a fraction of the world's environment here in the United States. And my understanding is that China is building it's a phenomenal statistic. I've heard they're opening a coal-powered electricity plant every 3 days in the country of China.
China continues to emit CO2 emissions. Yes, so these policies, they're not going to do anything about the environment, because the bottom line is that firstly, the climate is not changing at as catastrophic a rate as these people claim it does. But even if it is, supposing that these people are correct, which they're not, then they're not going to have any impact on global temperatures.
Yeah, it's a pretty sad circumstance. And of course, one of the things I've heard, I've been to Venice, is that Venice is going to be completely underwater. That doesn't seem to have happened yet. And that in the California, that the whole coastline is going to be underwater, and Modesto and the inland cities will suddenly become the new waterfront, stuff like that. People joked about that with me 40 years ago. Doesn't seem to have happened.
Well, there sadly, as we move forward in time, there's going to be many adverse events that come our way going forward,
Yes.
weather related or not weather related. And it's fundamentally important for us to be richer rather than poorer as a society to deal with these things. We need to be able to unlock innovations and be able to deal with issues that come our way. And we're not going to be able to do that if we impoverish ourselves as a society, moving away from the best forms of energy.
Absolutely. And of course, one of the things that troubles me, and I drew a parallel, you may not see the same parallel, but you're on the East Coast, is as you know, Asheville, North Carolina, less than a year ago, we had the Hurricane Helene go up the East Coast, and there was a terrible loss of life, somewhat similar in Asheville, North Carolina, to what just happened in Kerr County, Texas, where you have people who were settled, if you will, build houses and things very close to the bank of the river. So when the river had an unexpected event like a periodic hurricane, it created a much higher loss of life than it would have if we had said, this is a historical pattern. There are areas that we might have beaches out there and things, but we shouldn't allow housing there. And to me, there's a parallel between what happened in the Guadalupe River and what happened during the hurricane last fall in North Carolina.
But if you look at our paper, for example, we have
Yeah.
Joe DeLeo, who is a well-respected meteorologist who co-authored with me a paper on trends in hurricanes. And you could see over time, going back to the early 1900s, there has been no increase in trends in hurricanes and tornadoes, by the way. What they are linked to is natural oscillations, such as the El Nino Southern Oscillation and other forms of weather-related oscillations.
Well, that's a great point. And of course, I grew up in southeastern Massachusetts, which is Hurricane Alley, and I remember massive hurricanes when I was a little kid, and that's over 60 years ago, and that devastated gigantic trees and took out our community for days. But we were less densely populated, so I think it got a little bit less publicity than it does today.
And we have 5 more years left of this decade. I guarantee you we're going to see a couple more hurricanes probably.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I think the United States, don't we average about 20 on the East Coast a year?
Oh, absolutely. So the exact number off the top of my head, I don't remember. But yeah, there's going to be some minor hurricanes. There's going to be some major hurricanes. So we should be prepared.
Buckle up and take care of it. Dr. Kevin Dion, you are just wonderful. We really enjoy reading your work and learning about this important social issue. And I think that right now, people are listening more to you than they are to the climate crazies. I think that's a very important development in our society. And we really appreciate your time today. How can people get more information about you and your work?
So my work is available on the Heritage Foundation webpage. You can Google my name. I am on Twitter. KDD0211 is my Twitter handle, or X handle, I should say. And our book, Cooling the Climate Hysteria, is available on heritage.org.
Sounds like a winner.
Please proceed.
State Senate race in Texas goes to a Dem. A common story since late last year is the Dems continue to win races despite Trump's big win in November of 2024. The latest is a Texas State Senate race that will be up for election again before the Texas legislature convenes again in 2027. That's right, it means the person will never actually vote for anything. Democrat Taylor Remmett won by 14 points in a supposedly red district near Fort Worth. Trump won that district by 17, so this is a 31-point flip. The one thing is that GOP voters simply did not turn out. I can also volunteer that as much as the news junkie that I am, I did not even know this race up in Fort Worth was happening. So let's not read too much into this other than the GOP folks need to get on their track shoes and get rolling. Note the other Texas race was a special election to fill the congressional seat for the 18th congressional district, which has been held by whack liberals for over 35 years. So another whack liberal was elected by my congressional district. That is no biggie. This district is impacted by redistricting here in Texas, so I hope I will get a decent member of Congress following the November 2026 elections. And maybe the new 18th will get someone who actually helps the people of that district.
How does the defendant plead?
Rocky times in the UK. Morgan McSweeney, Chief of Staff to UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, resigned and said he was responsible for Peter Mendelsohn's appointment as ambassador to the United States in 2024. The reason that Mendelsohn is reportedly embroiled in the Epstein scandal that seems to be hitting high gear in Europe right now. In this case, it is not sexual activity, but reportedly releasing sensitive business information to Epstein in 2008. At present, there are no charges pending against Mendelsohn, who was removed from his ambassador position following the earlier release of Epstein documents last year.
Please raise your right hand.
GOP voters oppose Nexstar-Tegna merger. My regular audience knows that I oppose most mergers. I find we are coasting towards a world with fewer choices and higher prices. Lack of competition breeds stagnation. In no surprise to me, a national poll of GOP voters overwhelmingly opposed the proposed merger of Nexstar and Tegna, which is a $6.2 billion deal that includes an incredible 244 TV stations across 44 states. This would exceed the current legal ownership cap of 39% of U.S. households. I'm assuming this deal would require congressional approval to get past the current cap, and I hope that is not going to happen.
Sustained.
We in the United States are proud of our culture, a unique mix of cultures of the rest of the world. Over the last couple of years, stories have flooded in with negative reports about the loss of traditional cultures in UK, France, and Germany, especially as they have been inundated with immigrants who are not assimilating into the culture of their welcoming countries. In fact, they are aggressively promoting the adoption of their home countries in their new countries. A cautionary tale comes from Italy. I visited Italy several times over the years. It is a fascinating place with various regional cultures. A report from a European news service indicated there's been a challenge to a new delicatessen in the city of Padua. There's a plastic pig in the front window. Yes, I saw a picture of it, and there's a plastic pig about life size standing inside the front window of the business. In much of the world, this is no big deal. However, a local Muslim leader has asked to have it removed, calling it offensive and inappropriate. Many of the meats sold at this deli, after all, are made from pork. The person making the challenge does not sound like a typical Italian. So a newcomer to this town is demanding a change rather than assimilating into his new environment. What would come next? Blocking the sale of all products made from pork? Prosciutto, anyone? I would suggest this fellow might want to consider his choice of living occasions if he finds the plastic pig offensive.
Motion denied.
Business students, business persons, or consumers, business law impacts much of what you do. This segment is designed to help you get past the headlines on key stories. A corporation provides protection for a manager. Kenny Savoy, a former employee of Pritchard Energy Advisors, filed a breach of contract lawsuit against Thomas Pritchard, his former boss, in the United States District Court for the Western District of Louisiana. Savoy, a Louisiana resident, claimed that Pritchard, a Virginia resident, owed him compensation under a 2017 offer letter for work done on behalf of Empire Petroleum Corporation. Savoy alleged that Pritchard fraudulently informed him that the client company had not received any payments for his projects, thus denying him due compensation. The district court dismissed the case against Pritchard for lack of personal jurisdiction, concluding that Pritchard's contacts with Louisiana were made only in his corporate capacity and therefore protected by the fiduciary shield doctrine. The court found that Savoy failed to establish any exceptions to this doctrine that would allow Pritchard's corporate contacts to be attributed to him individually. The United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit reviewed the case and affirmed the district court's decision. The appellate court held that the fiduciary shield doctrine, which prevents the exercise of personal jurisdiction based solely on a defendant's corporate acts, applied in this case. The court noted that Louisiana law recognizes the fiduciary shield doctrine and that Savoy did not establish any exceptions such as piercing the corporate veil or alleging a tort for which Pritchard could be personally liable. Consequently, the court concluded that Pritchard's corporate contacts could not be used to establish personal jurisdiction over him in the state of Louisiana. With work increasingly being done across the United States, this is a very important concept. Otherwise, corporate employees could be sued in states in which they have no continuing business involvement. This is Dr. David D. Schein for Business Law 101. Tune in again.
Objection, Your Honor.
Los Angeles burns again. You would think that after the massive black eye LA got for its major fires recently, the city and state would do everything in its power to return trust in the country's second largest city. Well, nope. Pretty boy Newsom and perhaps the worst mayor in the history of America, Karen Bass, doubled down on stupid. Newsom already was kicked in the face for going to court to try and stop the National Guard from protecting the city of Los Angeles. He lost on that, of course. Unless you're living under a rock, you know the basics. ICE arrested 40 of some of the worst illegals in America in the city of Los Angeles. This included a double murderer and other serious criminals, according to reports. In turn, coordinated gangs attacked the ICE agents and tried to attack federal buildings. The local police were overwhelmed. Trump has sent in the National Guard and now more federal forces. The key aspect is to protect federal buildings. Amazingly, Democrat politicians have opposed both ICE raid of serious criminals and efforts to stop the violent rioting. The American disgraced Maxine Waters even tried to claim that there was no violence. She has turned herself into a caricature of a public figure. Her irrelevancy, Hillary Who, chimed in on this silly claim as well. The damage is extraordinary. Many cars were damaged, including 5 Waymo self-driving cars. The photo ops will help to confirm the decision of over 80% of Americans that illegal immigration has been a costly and damaging endeavor by the Biden-Harris administration. Seeing the protesters burn things, hurt law enforcement officers, and wave Mexican flags is not going to do anything but drive more Americans to the Trump agenda. Remember, some of the activists are associated with communist movements. We've all seen what a success communism is, right? I do not understand why law enforcement members who were in their cars when deadly concrete blocks were thrown through their windshields, that they did not use deadly force to protect themselves. Something is really wrong here. Given the chronic lax criminal prosecutions in LA, I call on federal prosecutors to charge those who are citizens with attacks on federal officers or buildings, and those who are not citizens should be deported immediately. One of my favorite reporters these days is Tyler O'Neill at the Daily Signal. He had a great article on the source of the mayhem in Los Angeles. His article identified 3 plotters behind this destructive rioting: the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights Los Angeles, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and the Service Employees International Union, SEIU. Especially disturbing is that this anti-American operation, Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, has received millions in government funding from the Biden-Harris administration. Their aim supposedly is to monitor but counter ICE activity. Why would the federal government give money to an organization that opposes the federal government's agencies? The O'Neill article notes that they deny involvement in the LA riots. Government funding has got to stop now. I note that David Huerta, president of the SEIU's California chapter, was arrested for interfering with an ICE vehicle. The interesting thing is that the heads of these unions still act like morons, while rank and file union members have begun to support Trump in record numbers. An argument is made that the unions, especially ones like the SEIU with a lot of low-paid jobs, hope to add illegals to their membership. However, I believe that many sensible union members regard the illegals as taking their jobs and driving down ambient wages. Let's see how this sorts out, folks. Adding to the misery are professional scumballs that are looting stores, including an Adidas and an Apple store in the immediate area of the rioting. I'm not sure how robbing small businesses would in any way help anyone's larger cause. Further, such damage increases already high insurance costs for Californians. And in fact, many insurance companies have been fleeing California, getting tough out there, folks. And they've gotten it by voting for people like Newsom and Bass. In the meantime, I again remind the Dems in my audience of the riots at the Democrat Presidential Convention in Chicago in 1968. I believe that the riots cost Hubert Humphrey the election over an unpopular Richard Nixon. Violence and anti-American chants are not going to win the vote of the majority of Americans. Here's the right way to do it. Texas Governor Abbott did this in advance of protests scheduled for San Antonio. The state of Texas stands ready to deploy all necessary personnel and resources to uphold law and order across our state. Texas National Guard soldiers are on standby in areas where mass demonstrations are planned in case they are needed. Peaceful protests are part of the fabric of our nation, but Texas will not tolerate the lawlessness we have seen in Los Angeles. Anyone engaging in acts of violence or damaging property will be swiftly held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. So, unlike Los Angeles, local authorities are working with state and federal officials to control potential violence. This is how Americans should react. Nobody forget this when the California failures try to run for president in a few years.
May I remind you, you're still under oath.
Russia and Ukraine, deal or no deal? So the kickoff was Trump and Putin meeting in Alaska. Naturally, there was no consensus on whether this was good or bad. Some pundits said the big bomber flyover in the row of top military jets that Putin walked past was a message to him. On the other hand, letting a whack mass murderer onto U.S. territory had other implications. Was Trump taking a knee to Putin? I hate commies, and especially murdering commies like Putin. I do not like that he came onto U.S. soil without being in handcuffs, like we would treat a Mexican cartel leader. At the same time, over 1 million humans have died. Time to end the killing. Overall, the meeting went about as well as could be expected. This was followed by a meeting a few days later with Zelensky, and this was immediately followed by meetings with top European leaders. They have pledged to support Ukraine. No way to object to that. This interesting outcome was European officials talked about a U.S.-backed Article 5 type security guarantees for Ukraine. Apparently, that's a NATO term. Trump indicated the USA part would not be boots on the ground, but it is assumed we will provide the armaments for Ukraine to defend itself and perhaps start attacking Russia. U.S. air support was also suggested. It is tricky since they are trying to keep NATO out of this at the same time due to Putin's strong resistance to that. There was then talk of a two-way or a three-way summit to reach some type of a peace deal. That is cloudy at the moment. The most recent word is that Trump wants Putin and Zelensky to meet first, and then a trilateral meeting can happen after that. There are massive issues here. I hate to see Putin get 1 foot of Ukrainian land, but the likelihood is that this is not going to be the deal. I do not think Putin can block endlessly Ukraine joining the rest of Europe. I think the recent commitment to 5% across NATO for military expenditures will hopefully convince this murderer that any expansion he's dreaming about now is over.
Silence in the court.
Our series interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. Once you hear from our next guest, I'm sure that you'll agree that she deserves the moniker of interesting person. Saving America welcomes Debbie Ausburn, who's a social worker turned lawyer who has worked with youth serving organizations, or YSOs, for more than 40 years. She jokes that she has a career ADD that led her into a variety of professional experiences before settling into a legal practice of advising YSOs. She served as a foster parent, juvenile court caseworker, private school teacher, camp counselor, mentor for young adults, volunteer, board member with nonprofit youth organizations, and federal prosecutor of crimes against children. She currently serves as a civil attorney and working with YSOs, defending lawsuits, assisting with internal investigations, and advising clients about best practices for child safety. She's never had biological children, but she has collected 7 children and 10 grandchildren. She's outnumbering me. She put the lessons that her children taught her in her first book, Raising Other People's Children: What Foster Parenting Taught Me About Bringing Together a Blended Family. Her most recent book is Protecting Other People's Children: 120 Days to Create a Strong Child Safety Policy, which she wrote with Tom Rawlings. We welcome Debbie Ausburn for her first appearance on Saving America.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, we're delighted to have you here. So you've dedicated your life to helping children, both natural parents and foster parents. What was the trigger in your life for you to pursue this important work?
I believe it was growing up with my parents, who were always involved with helping kids ministries. They had a summer camp 1 week every summer for the church, and they did a lot of church ministries. So I grew up in that milieu. Back then, we called them at-risk kids. Kids from broken families or dysfunctional families. And that is really what led me into being a caseworker with juvenile court. But, once I got there, I burned out. I got tired of dipping out the ocean with a teaspoon. But I still care. Individual kids kind of get inside your defenses and wrap themselves around your heart. And so I wanted to stay in a way of helping them as much as I could. And so I do joke about having career ADD, but all of my different jobs kept leading me back to helping kids in one form or another.
Well, it's a fascinating background to get where you've arrived. And regarding your first book, please share with the audience some of the important aspects of being a foster parent, because the demand has never been larger, from what I understand.
It is, and it is very difficult working with government agencies, but because they're government agencies. It never gets any better. But the lessons that I learned, I always recommend that people go with a private agency, so you at least have some layer of advocacy and ability to advocate for you with child protection services. And then the other thing I found, and this is being both a foster parent and a step parent, is you have to remember from the kid's perspective, we are not the people who are supposed to be in their lives. They have it's almost a primal need for an intact biological family. And the Parent Trap movies, if you remember
Yes,
those,
sure do.
kids always want their biological parents to be in a family, and it is very hard for them to adjust to the realities of their situation. And it's almost like their life is going to be a record that's I don't know if people still have records, but it's going to be off center and off kilter, and it is hard for them to make that adjustment to recognizing that the reality they have is the one they have. And we have to approach that situation with a lot of compassion and empathy and understanding.
And may I assume that the age of the foster child, the older the child is, the more difficult that process becomes?
Well, it does. It really doesn't matter when the child starts with you. When any kid hits puberty, even biological kids in wonderful families, puberty just does a number on all of us. And so the closer they get to puberty, the more difficult their lives are. And that I always tell my friends about teenagers, all you can do is just, you treat it like a roller coaster. You just make sure the safety bar is down and hang on until the ride is over.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. My oldest grandchild is just hit puberty in the last year, and it's entertaining to see
Yes.
the interaction.
That's right. Well, the good news is the aliens will return their brain eventually.
I think that's a wonderful line. I'll have to tell my daughter that, who's dealing with it in Technicolor. It seems sometimes that the grandparents, we do better with her than her mom does.
Yes. That little bit of distance and that little bit of give and leeway in the rules, they will listen to mentors and grandparents a lot sooner than they will parents. And again, that's built in. It's part of the union rules for teenagers that they have to disagree with their parents. So.
Absolutely. Been there, done that, and in Technicolor, so fully understand. As a parent and grandparent myself, as well as a concerned member of the community, I do not think we can overemphasize child safety. Tell us how your new book with Tom Rawlings contributes to this important community focus of child safety.
Well, we wrote this for the lessons that I've learned from a lot of my clients over the years. And so we wrote this for youth organizations that I feel like they're dealing with a fire hose of information. They have to do all of these things and they have to do them yesterday. And so we set it out in a step-by-step, month-by-month format. You eat an elephant one bite at a time sort of approach. And so we set it out on a timeline. The 120 days is more of a goal than a deadline, but it helps people understand you don't have to do it all today. You do things one step at a time. And then the big thing that Tom and I have found from our clients is a lot of them are well-meaning and good intentioned, and they go out and they talk to experts or get information on the web or hire consultants who come in and give them a cookie cutter program, policies that just don't really work for their program. And so the staff eventually finds the rules too cumbersome, or they get in the way of the mission, and they have what in the industry, safety industry, you call normalized deviance, which is everybody just ignores the rules. And that, 95% of the time you're okay ignoring the rules, but it's that 5% of the time that it can come back to haunt the organizations. So Tom and I always say that the second worst thing an organization can do is not have a child safety policy. The absolute worst thing they can do is have a policy that they don't follow.
And what would you say are some of the key aspects of that? Because, I think about safety a lot, and I don't advise child organizations, I advise employers, but I emphasize how critical it is to keep employees safe. So I know what we talk about. I'm wondering, what are some of the key elements that you talk about with regard to child safety?
Well, the key elements, the first thing is understanding the purpose behind the rule so that you can adapt it as needed. So I will give you an example. I had a client call me one day, and a consultant had said to them, every adult who comes onto your campus has to have a criminal records check before they get past the door. Well, that sounds wonderful for some organizations, but this client was a summer camp, and they said, what do we do about Parents' Day? I cannot possibly get records checks on all the parents before they show up, number one. And then secondly, what do I do about repair people? The chances of getting a plumber on a Friday night who will give me a records check before they come fix my toilet, if they even show up on a Friday night, it is nil. And so that's an example of where we tell them, you look past what is the purpose of that rule, and that is you don't want anyone you haven't vetted to have access to the kids. So the much more realistic principle for that particular client or other similar clients is you don't worry so much about the screening prong as you worry about the supervision prong. So you make sure that if repair people come in, that there's someone with them at all times. That if you have a parents' day, you make clear to the parents when they arrive, they are responsible for supervising their kids. And you know which kids don't have parents there that day, and those are the ones that your staff needs to supervise.
Sure.
So that's when you look at past the rule and figure out what the principle is and how your organization can meet that principle in ways that work and that work consistently, and that your staff can do it on a regular basis.
Makes perfect sense. Well, Debbie Ausburn, it's a delight to have you with us today. How can our audience get more information about you, your important work, and of course, your books?
Well, you can find me on debbieausburn.com, or we sell the books and have some online courses dealing with this. We have a lot of online courses for youth serving organizations at ysoacademy.com.
Very good. Thank you so much.
The defense rests, Your Honor.
China continues its threat to civilization because much of the slopstream media soft pedals or ignores the human rights and privacy violations by the CCP. I feel part of Saving America's mission is to help keep its repression and violations on the front page. I credit Epoch Times, which is working with its partner NTD News, continuing to keep the focus on the plot to destroy civilization by the CCP. A new international human rights report by the U.S. State Department detailed the global repression by the CCP. It is interesting that while many in this country suffer, the CCP wastes resources around the globe with assaults, harassment, hacking, anonymous threats, and false reports in various media. The report referred to the approach as transnational repression. Those who tuned in know that ethnic Uyghurs, spiritual practitioners like Falun Gong, Chinese dissidents, foreign journalists, and Chinese students and faculty members studying outside China are all targets. The report describes the CCP's actions as some of the most comprehensive campaign ever known. Highlighted was Xi's visit to San Francisco for the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in late 2023. Reports are that protesters arranged through CCP repression programs attacked pro-democracy activists with flagpoles and chemical spray. In the report, it tells the story of a former CCP undercover agent who defected to Australia after 15 years. He revealed in 2024 to the Epoch Times how he was, quoting from the article, sent after a Thailand-based Falun Gong practitioner who had fled China to escape the CCP's persecution of his faith. The handler, in assigning him the job, gave him photos showing the name and location of the target's apartment, as well as several photos of the man and his family, some of which had not been on social media. Note that Xi and the CCP are so crazy they're going after Falun Gong, which is a group that advocates meditation. Folks, I always talk about meditation because I have two speeds, fast and sleeping. I can't meditate, I go to sleep. Anyway, not sure why the CCP sees a group that would meditate as a problem. The article also provides information about threats in other countries. It also discusses cyber attacks from China. This is serious stuff, and the U.S. and its allies need to strike back. There have been multiple reports on the forced labor of the Uyghurs, as well as 1 million of them being in forced conscription situations. And of course, we previously talked about the theft of bodily organs. As well, we talked recently about the CCP preventing journalists from leaving even a 7-year-old son of one of the dissident reporters. Recently, I learned that even a Catholic bishop is being held as a political prisoner along with many others. On the heels of this, Fred Lucas at the Daily Signal said that due to the efforts of the Doge operation, the feds will stop American funding of research on retirement in China. I was just amazed that this was even an issue. Lucas reported that research has run for a decade and a grant of $1.7 million to continue to fund the research was just stopped. Thank goodness. The total amount spent already reached $13.3 million in this longitudinal study. However, speaking as a trained researcher, what relevance would a study have to Americans when the entire style of life and healthcare is so different in China?
I'll allow it.
Couldn't happen to a more deserving loser. Days after New York Attorney General Letitia James faces serious allegations about multiple mortgage fraud, none other than Trump accuser and Russiagate fraudster Adam Schiff has similar accusations. Reports said that despite recently being elected a senator from California, the former California congressman has repeatedly claimed that houses in Maryland were his principal residence for mortgage purposes. His residency claims could also impact his election in California, since he incredibly claimed to be a California resident while officially living in Maryland and taking the mortgage advantage there. That's possible election fraud, folks. Icing on the cake was continuing to claim voter residence in California while not having a home in the state for both him and his wife. So welcome to the party, friends. This could be real interesting.
This session is adjourned.
Thanks for joining me for Saving America. If you have questions or comments, please find me on various social media sites. I'm Dr. David D. Schein, and I will see you next week.
Thank you, viewers and listeners of USA Global TV and Radio, for joining us today. We're honored to have your time and attention as part of our global community. At USA Global TV and Radio, we believe in the power of authentic conversations, meaningful connections, and creating a world of possibilities together. Want to be part of something bigger? Join our team of elevated listeners at usaglobaltv.com, a space where your voice matters and your ability to listen transforms relationships. Stay connected with us across all our platforms for thought-provoking discussions, expert insights, and empowering stories. Subscribe to our channels at youtube.com/c/USAGlobalTV. Follow us on social media and explore the endless opportunities we're creating for growth, learning, and inspiration. Together, we're not just broadcasting, We're building bridges and changing lives one conversation at a time. For inquiries, contact us at info@usaglobaltv.com. Produced by Executive Producer and Director Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Voiceover by Mike Porter. Creative Direction by Paul Garcia. All rights reserved. Visit usaglobaltv.com to view our full terms and conditions.